Maybe Baby, a short story. Sapphire Bay Romance Book 3. Written by Sandra Edwards. Narrated by Heather Masters. Chapter 1. Every morning at precisely 7 a.m., he passed through Sapphire Bay's lobby and headed into the Beachcomber Cafe. Amanda Wainwright had no idea who he was or why he was there, but considering the amount of time he stayed, she decided he was having breakfast. She often wondered if he ate alone. He never walked in or out with anyone. One of these days, on her day off, she was going to go into the cafe for breakfast at right around 7. One of these days. Just not today. Today, as most days, she was busy at Sapphire Bay's registration desk. She'd been lucky enough to land an internship at the resort, thanks to her sister, Jeannie Wainwright Taylor, and she didn't want to muck it up. For Amanda, spending the next year in Hawaii was a dream come true. She'd been in paradise for about a month. Came over right after the spring semester ended. Initially, she'd thought interning at Sapphire Bay for a year would go a long way toward landing a primo position in hotel management back on the mainland. But after just a couple of weeks in Hawaii, she was quickly learning that getting the proverbial sand out of her shoes might prove to be harder than she'd first imagined. But that was practically a year away. For the time being, Amanda was determined to enjoy her stay, and catching a glimpse of Mr. Incredibly Scrumptious first thing every morning was a great way to start her day. At approximately 7:40, like clockwork, he exited the cafe. Today, like every other day, Amanda watched him go. He's cute, huh? Marla, the hotel owner's mother, had a habit of appearing from out of nowhere. She also knew a good-looking man when she saw one. Yeah, Amanda nodded, her eyes still glued to the eye candy as he headed for the door. You should talk to him, Marla said, like it'd be so easy to waltz right up to him and start talking. Amanda looked at Marla. I wouldn't know what to say. Good morning would be a start. Amanda considered it for about 2 seconds. She could see it now. She'd introduce herself, and he'd simply stare at her like she was nuts. No thanks. She shook her head. I don't want to make a fool out of myself. Marla studied Amanda, then said, You should tell Jeannie you want to fill in as hostess at the Beachcomber a couple of mornings. Marla's words sent up a bright flare in Amanda's head. What a great idea. That would at least give Amanda a reason to talk to him. That's an awesome idea, Marla, Amanda said. I'm going to have to talk to Jeannie about it. Talk to me about what? Jeannie asked. Amanda had been so wrapped up in her daydreams that she hadn't seen her sister walk up. Amanda shrugged. I wanted to get some time in as hostess at the Beachcomber. Jeannie gave a one-sided shrug, then said, Sure, I don't see a problem with that. It wasn't an unusual or unreasonable request, since Amanda was there to get some first-hand experience in hotel management. Want to start tomorrow? Tomorrow? That ranked right up there in the too good to be true category. Sure. Erin's got a family emergency back on the mainland. She's leaving this afternoon, Jeannie said. Hopefully, I'll be more help than hindrance, Amanda laughed. Marla waved it off. You just smile and say, Good morning. Table for 1, 2, 3. It's easy. Marla shrugged. However many are in the party, and then you show them to an empty table. Amanda knew it was a little more complicated than that. For one thing, The hostess had to make sure the diners were spread evenly among the waitresses, so everyone had a fair chance at tips. "Uh-oh," Jeannie said softly. "Incoming." That was Jeannie's warning voice, which was never good. Amanda glanced up at her sister and followed her gaze toward the lobby. Barry Gadsden. Amanda blew out a heavy sigh. It was too late to run and hide. Barry had already seen her. It was no secret that he had a thing for Amanda. He just wasn't her type. He was awkward and kind of goofy. Even so, she didn't want to hurt his feelings. Instead of having to respond to a dreaded dinner invitation, or whatever he was working himself up to ask her, she did her best to avoid it altogether. Whenever possible, Amanda avoided Barry, but there were times, like now, when she was stuck. She squared her shoulders, as if that'd help her fend off his advances. "Barry?" Jeannie spoke up. "Didn't you make a delivery a couple of days ago?" He grinned sheepishly, then stole a peek at Amanda, who at that very instant turned away, pretending to search through a box sitting on the counter behind the registration desk. "Mr. Taylor ordered additional arrangements for the 4th. Barry worked at Trini's Flowers, the best flower shop on the island. He was the designated delivery man for the North Shore, which, to Amanda's dismay, meant he showed up at the hotel a lot. "Trini sent me over to make sure we know exactly how many displays to bring, and to confirm where they'll be set up." Anxiety crept up Amanda's spine. In situations like this, escorting Barry around the hotel would be something pawned off on her, the intern. "Please, Jeannie," she prayed, "don't send me off with him." "I've got a list somewhere. Amanda." Jeannie paused. Amanda's cue to look over her shoulder. She didn't want to, but she didn't have a choice. Big sister was the boss. When their eyes met, Jeannie continued. "I think it's in my office." She winked at Amanda. "Could you go check?" "Sure." Amanda nodded and darted off toward the elevators. Hopefully by the time she returned, Barry would be gone. Chapter 2. The next morning, 7:30 came and went, with no sign of him. From the Beachcombers' hostess station, Amanda peered around the restaurant, then blew out a sigh. So much for bright ideas. At 8:30, Donnie showed up. With a smile and the hint of a chuckle, he said to Amanda, "How do you like hostessing?" She shrugged. "I can take it or leave it." "You're taking your internship seriously." He nodded. "A year from now, Jeannie and I may want to put you on the payroll permanently." "In my dreams," she laughed. "Is Jeannie joining you for breakfast?" Donnie shook his head. "No. This morning I'm wining and dining Brad Good." Amanda raised a curious eyebrow. Donnie chuckled. "I probably should have enlisted Jeannie to do that. Or you." Amanda shook her head. "That is not in my job description." "That's what Jeannie said." Donnie took a couple of steps inside the restaurant, then glanced over his shoulder, adding, "Would you bring Mr. Good to my table when he gets here?" "Sure thing," Amanda said. She didn't know who Brad Good was, but considering her impact on Barry Gadsden, she'd better keep her distance. 15 minutes passed as Amanda went about her business, seating guests in the restaurant and chatting with those she had come to know. She wasn't expecting to look up and see him, standing at the "Please wait to be seated" sign, He was late. She'd given up on him coming in this morning, and now that he was here, she didn't quite know what to say. "You're the hostess, you idiot," she chastised herself. "Good morning," she said, surprised that she hadn't stumbled over the greeting. "Table for one?" she asked, reaching for a menu. "I'm meeting Donnie Taylor. My name is Brad Good." "Oh, Mr. Good." Amanda's heart pounded a little faster, but it was overshadowed by her curiosity about what kind of business he might have with the owner of Sapphire Bay. "Donnie's waiting for you. Let me show you to his table." She beckoned him to follow her. He did. When Donnie saw them, he stood, offering his hand to Brad. "Good morning, Brad. Thanks for meeting me." "What else could I do? I'm curious." Brad shook Donnie's hand and snuck a peek at Amanda, then looked back at Donnie. Donnie gestured at Amanda. "This is my sister-in-law, Amanda Wainwright. She's Jeannie's sister." "I do believe I see a resemblance." Brad gave her a hint of a smile. "It's nice to meet you." "It's nice to meet you, too." Amanda placed a menu on the opposite side of the table from Donnie, then backed away. "Enjoy your breakfast," she said, then hightailed it out of there. The breakfast crowd turned into the lunch crowd without too much fanfare. Amanda had been so busy she hadn't noticed when Brad and Donnie left the restaurant. That was a little disheartening, and a little bit of a godsend at the same time. She hadn't had a chance to wallow in her misery over watching him leave. Yet again. After the lunchtime crowd fizzled out, Amanda left the beachcomber and went back to the registration desk. At least now she knew his name. He'd been nice, friendly even, but nothing to suggest that he was as enamored with her as she was with him. "Story of my life," she thought with a shrug. Jeannie sauntered up to the registration counter. "You had lunch yet?" Amanda said, "No." "Let's go eat." "Okay. Besides, maybe Jeannie would know what business Donnie had with Brad Good." As his name rang out in her head, she realized there was something familiar about it, but Amanda couldn't put her finger on what. Amanda followed Jeannie into the ocean view. It was always a good choice for lunch. They offered burgers, sandwiches and wraps, salads, and a variety of entrees. Amanda liked their Hawaiian salad, fresh fruits, grated cheeses, and cottage cheese stuffed into half a pineapple. The girls headed for Jeannie's table at the far end of the open windows. Amanda liked sitting there, in the gentle breeze blowing in off the ocean. That, and the sound of the waves rolling in and out, made her understand why people called this place paradise. "So, why aren't you having lunch with Donnie?" Amanda asked. "He's trying to close a business deal with Brad Good." "I saw them together this morning," Amanda said, trying to sound casual. "Who is this guy, anyway?" "Be Good Surfboards." Jeannie looked at her as if that'd ring a bell. It didn't. Amanda shrugged. What did she know about surfboards? She wasn't a swimmer, much less a surfer. Amanda's hopes fizzled out. "He's a surfer?" Not that there was anything wrong with surfers. Well, yes, there was. Amanda had known one surfer during her first year at San Diego State. Charlie had been a nice enough guy, except for that wanderlust thing. He was forever chasing that big wave, no matter where it took him. Who could build a relationship with a guy like that? "Well, no," Jeannie said. "Not in the traditional sense. He developed that video game, Surf's Up?" She glanced at Amanda. "Surely you've heard of it. I see commercials for it on TV all the time." A video game? Yes, she knew it. Maybe Amanda had read somewhere that Brad Good was the game's creator. That's probably why his name sounded so familiar. What does a video game have to do with surfboards? A lot, apparently. Jeannie flashed Amanda an approving look. Especially when they're associated with a game as popular as Surf's Up. Brad has developed a line of surfboards associated with the boards in the game, and Donnie is dying to have Be Good surfboards sold exclusively here at Sapphire Bay. If that's what your husband wants, Amanda said, I'm sure he'll make it happen. At least that way, Amanda could continue to admire Brad Good from afar. Anything else was unimaginable. Brad Good was way out of her league. After lunch, Amanda went back to the registration desk, where she and Joel, the other clerk on duty, enjoyed the afternoon's leisurely pace. With the 4th of July holiday right around the corner, she had a feeling that things were going to turn hectic quickly. She spotted Barry Gadsden coming through the entryway and ducked into the office behind the registration desk. She could hear Barry out there asking, Is Amanda around? She was just here a few minutes ago, Joel said. I'll go look in the back. As soon as Joel appeared through the door, Amanda shook her head and gestured wildly. Even an idiot, which Joel sometimes resembled, could get the hint that she didn't want to talk to Barry. Joel came toward her with the beginnings of a smile spreading over his face. What's wrong? He whispered. Why don't you want to talk to Barry? That's not funny, Joel, Amanda chastised him in a soft voice. Tell him you don't know where I am. They both knew it was only a matter of time before Barry cornered Amanda and asked her out on a date. But Amanda was determined that day was not going to be today. Later that afternoon, a bouquet of multicolored roses and a box of candy were delivered to the registration desk. Amanda was more thankful than curious about why it had been delivered by someone other than Barry. Room number? Amanda asked the delivery girl. Peering at the bouquet of peach, lavender, pink, and white roses. The matching pink box and its lavender ribbon added a nice touch. No room number, the girl said. I was told to leave it here at the registration desk. Amanda signed the girl's tablet, then let her eyes settle back on the incredibly beautiful bouquet of flowers. Wow! Jeannie walked up, scrutinizing the roses. Would you look at those? Jeannie, of course. Amanda looked at her sister. I'll bet they're for you. Me? Jeannie flashed a doubtful look at her. Amanda said, They have Donnie written all over them. Jeannie plucked the miniature envelope from the roses and pulled out the card, scanning it quickly. A know-it-all smile tipped the corners of her mouth as she cut her eyes toward Amanda. Jeannie offered her the envelope. Amanda took it and glanced at it. Her name was scribbled on the front. They're for me? She looked at Jeannie, then stretched out her hand. Why are you reading my card? Jeannie handed over the card, saying, I just wanted to make sure my husband wasn't sending you flowers. Give me a break, Amanda said, then let her gaze drift down to the card. Beautiful roses and sweet treats to beg the favor of the most beautiful woman on earth. B.G. Amanda's mouth dropped open. B.G. B.G.? What the? Her voice trailed off as she contemplated who B.G. might be. Who's B.G.? Jeannie asked. Amanda squinted as she looked at Jeannie. Like I'd know. She rolled her eyes. Is this some kind of joke? Jeannie touched a flower, then picked up the box of candy. Dulafy chocolates. Premium roses. She shrugged. Who's going to spend this kind of money on a joke? Ooh, Dulafy chocolates. Marla stopped at the box of candy. Who's the lucky girl? Jeannie pointed at Amanda. Marla opened the box, claimed a piece, and nibbled off a bite. Divine, she said, around a pleasurable moan. You've been holding out on us. No, I haven't, Amanda said. Nothing says love like edible 24-karat gold, Marla said. Who is he? I haven't a clue who would send me the flowers and candy. Amanda stopped abruptly as the obvious culprit came to mind. Oh, God. She closed her eyes and tried to wish it away. Who else? Barry Gadsden. It was obvious. Barry worked at the hottest flower shop on the island. Of course it was him. He'd been sniffing around like a lost puppy ever since Amanda came to Sapphire Bay. Who? Marla asked. It's so obvious, Amanda said. It's Barry. Marla raised her eyebrows. Jeannie sighed. Bet that candy doesn't taste so great now, does it? Amanda said to Marla. What are you talking about? Marla asked, going for a second piece. I'd eat the whole box while I was making up an imaginary boyfriend. That is so wrong. Jeannie let out a wicked giggle as she went for a piece of candy. You guys, this is not funny, Amanda said, her voice filling with desperation. What am I going to do? I don't know, but you'd better figure it out fast, Jeannie said, pointing toward the door. Here he comes. Amanda squatted and scampered into the back office without being seen by Barry. Inside the office, she pushed herself up and pressed her back against the wall, listening, hoping that neither woman gave her away. Hey, Jeannie, Marla. Barry's chirpy voice flowed into the office. Is Amanda around? No, please say no, Amanda pled silently. I'm afraid not, Barry, Jeannie said evasively. Will she be back soon? He asked. I kind of wanted to talk to her. Probably not until tomorrow, Marla spoke up. Amanda and her boyfriend went over to the Big Island. She's got a boyfriend? He said it like his hopes had just been stomped on. I'm afraid so, Marla said, feigning sympathy. There was a slight pause, then she added, Would you like a candy? Jeannie couldn't help but laugh at Marla offering Barry a piece of the candy that Amanda was so sure he'd sent her. Jeannie wasn't convinced, though. If it was him, he'd likely be going hungry this week. Dulafy chocolates were expensive. Once Barry had disappeared outside, Jeannie said, loud enough for Amanda to hear, He's gone. You can come out now. When Amanda didn't come out, Jeannie added, Did you fall asleep in there? Amanda peered out cautiously. Are you sure he's gone? She whispered. Marla waved her out. He's gone. I can't believe you offered him a piece of his own candy, Amanda said. Marla shook her head. I'm not so sure that Barry sent the candy. Amanda studied Marla through squinted eyes. She may have a point, Jeannie said. I mean, we were assuming that Barry sent you the flowers and candy because we know he likes you. She shrugged. But Dulafy chocolates are rather expensive for a delivery person. Plus, Marla said, he had no particular reaction to me offering him some of the candy. Marla looked at Amanda with a wide-eyed expression. She believed what she was saying, and so did Jeannie. Let's face it, the man who sent this candy would not be able to ignore the hotel staff passing it around to every passerby. By now, Jeannie knew her mother-in-law was attuned to this sort of thing, and there was persuasive evidence to confirm Marla's suspicions. That left Jeannie wondering. If Barry didn't send Amanda the candy and flowers, who did? Chapter 3. The next morning, Jeannie wanted Amanda to put all her efforts into finding out who'd sent the flowers and candy, but Amanda had other ideas. Since she had the morning off, she was determined to go into the Beachcomber for breakfast, to see who Brad Good was dining with, if anyone. But she wasn't going to tell Jeannie that. As the girls stepped into the elevator, Amanda said, "Let's put our heads together over breakfast." It was a splendid idea. Amanda gave herself a mental pat on the back because she wouldn't have to dine alone, and she could still keep an eye out for Brad. "In the Beachcomber?" Jeannie asked. Amanda gave a half shrug, hoping she didn't appear too anxious. "Yeah, I love the stuffed French toast." Jeannie thought about it, then said, "Okay." Inside the Beachcomber, they sat at Jeannie and Donnie's reserved table near the far corner by the open windows. Jeannie talked, but Amanda had a hard time concentrating on what she was saying because of the scene just outside the window. She was mesmerized by the crystal blue waves as they rushed up to the shoreline and then rolled back out again. Amanda would never tire of the view. They ordered breakfast. Jeannie an omelet, Amanda the stuffed French toast. While they waited for the food, Jeannie speculated on who Amanda's secret admirer might be, but never landed on a solid lead. "Come on," Jeannie coaxed her. "You have to have some idea who it might be." Amanda shrugged. "I thought it was Barry." Jeannie shook her head. "It's not him." "Then I'm at a loss." "Come on. Isn't there someone you've been flirting with?" Jeannie asked. Amanda glared at Jeannie. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." Anybody who knew Amanda knew she was far too shy to flirt with strangers, or anyone else for that matter. From the corner of her eye, Amanda saw Brad Good come into the restaurant. She played an inner tug-of-war with her eyes to keep them from locking on him. She didn't want Jeannie to know the real reason they were having breakfast at the Beachcomber. Amanda let her eyes casually roll over the dining room in hopes of seeing where the hostess seated him. The hostess led Brad to a two-person table along the wall behind Jeannie. Good. Amanda would be able to keep her eye on him without it being noticeable to her sister. Jeannie's voice broke into Amanda's thoughts. "Well, you've obviously caught someone's eye." Amanda's heart pounded wildly. "Why do you say that? Did Jeannie see through her infatuation?" "Somebody sent you some damned expensive candy and flowers." Later that afternoon, while Amanda was on duty at the registration desk, the periodic bouts of solitude gave her time to ask herself the very same question that Jeannie had been so determinedly seeking an answer to. Who sent the candy and flowers? After a lot of thought, Amanda came to the conclusion that Marla and Jeannie were wrong. It had to be Barry. There was no one else. Marla appeared around a corner and made her way behind the registration desk. She stopped at Amanda's side and said, "Any news?" Amanda didn't need Marla to say more to know what she was talking about. She shrugged and shook her head. Your guess is as good as mine. There was no use bringing up Barry's name again. Marla had cleared him of any suspicion, and no one could convince her otherwise. Hell, even if Barry was caught red-handed, Marla would still be hard-pressed to believe it. Marla tapped her perfectly manicured pink fingernails on the counter and looked around the hotel lobby. Her gaze stopped at the entrance and stayed there. Someone carrying a huge display of white roses. There must have been 2 or 3 dozen roses in the vase. Headed toward the registration desk. The bouquet was so large that it hid the delivery person from cap to belt. Gorgeous, Amanda thought, eyeing the flowers. Wow, Marla said. When you get a load of those. The delivery person, who turned out to be a woman in her 20s, set the roses on the counter and went for her messenger bag. She pulled out a box of Noka chocolates and a clipboard, set the chocolates on the counter beside the roses, then offered the clipboard and a pen to Amanda and Marla. I just need a signature. Amanda obliged her, wondering who was going to get the unlucky task of delivering these undoubtedly heavy flowers to the intended guest. Maybe they could get Joel to do it. Marla let the delivery girl get about 3 steps away from the door before she started canvassing the flowers for a card. Amanda chuckled inside because, no matter who they were for in this hotel of 38 floors and 462 rooms and suites, she'd bet that Marla would know exactly who the recipient was. Marla found the card on the outer side of the arrangement and plucked it from its perch. Reading the addressee's info, her eyebrows shot up and her mouth dropped open a little. Her gaze drifted to Amanda. You've got some explaining to do, Marla said, pointing the card at her. Amanda glanced down at the card, then back up at Marla. What are you talking about? Marla raised a well-defined eyebrow, then offered the card to her. Amanda took it, seeing her name on the envelope. She slipped the note out and scanned it. Amanda, if you're not otherwise engaged, will you have dinner with me this evening? Meet me at the Wishing Well at 7 p.m. B.G. Oh, God. Amanda groaned. She rolled her eyes and tossed the card onto the counter. What? Marla asked, her eyes darting to the card lying face down on the counter. Who's it from? What's it going to take for this guy to get the hint? Amanda blew out her frustrations in a sigh. That was all it took for Marla to snatch up the card to read it. B.G., she whispered, glancing around the immediate area. Barry Gadsden, Amanda said. Her voice had grown stern from the exhaustion of it all. Marla frowned, then shook her head. This is not Barry. Who else can it be? I don't know, but it's not Barry. Marla stood her ground. I don't see how you know that. Barry lacks 2 qualities, well, 3 really, that's needed for this. Marla held the card up. Confidence. He doesn't have a romantic bone in his body, and he doesn't have the kind of money it takes to buy this kind of candy. Amanda would like it to be so. She wanted her secret admirer to be someone who could make her forget about Brad Good. Brad Good. B.G. Amanda gasped. What? Marla's interest perked up. Do we have a candidate? Amanda wasn't about to set herself up for embarrassment by saying his name out loud when she wasn't sure. No, thank you. She shook her head. I was just wondering, if it's not Barry, then who is it? Which is exactly why you have to show up tonight. Amanda had her doubts that her secret admirer would turn out to be Brad Good. But she dressed in a black, off-the-shoulder lace sheath, just in case. She'd gone to great lengths to make sure her hair was coiffed to perfection, and her makeup looked like she'd had it done at a salon. She looked pretty darn good, she thought. Brad Good? She whispered as she studied herself in the bathroom mirror. You are one lucky guy. She gave her reflection a quick nod, then left the bathroom. Out in the living room of her suite on the 34th floor, Amanda grabbed her cell and stuffed it inside her clutch purse before heading out. She was looking forward to a good meal. She knew the wishing well was good, and it would have been on the wrong side of her budget if not for her ties to the resort. She was glad he'd chosen it. It showed he was willing to go the extra mile to impress her. Amanda stepped into the elevator, thankful that she was alone so she could let a variety of greetings sail through her thoughts. She'd need to choose one before she got to the restaurant. The elevator doors closed. Hi, Brad, flittered across her mind. Okay, so what was she supposed to say after that? Thanks for inviting me? I loved the flowers and candy? Well, at least Marla had liked the candy. Amanda wasn't much for dark chocolate. She continued to let her brain form possible greetings and conversation starters. To be honest, I didn't think you'd noticed me. What took you so long? Amanda laughed out loud. This is either going to turn out really good or really bad, she said as an uneasy feeling swirled around her. She glanced down at the red high heels she was wearing. They complemented the black dress well. She'd dressed with the idea that she was meeting Brad Good for dinner. But what if she wasn't? What if it was somebody else? What if it was Barry? Suddenly, her dress felt entirely too short. If her date turned out to be Barry Gadsden, she was not dressed appropriately. He would take it as an open invitation. Just when Amanda was considering hitting number 34 on the elevator panel to run straight back upstairs, the doors slid open. She stood there, frozen. The hustle and bustle of the resort's guests and staff milling through the lobby made her forget, momentarily, about the fact that she didn't know who she was dining with this evening. Just as that notion settled in and took root, Jeannie passed by the elevator door. She stopped and practically gawked at Amanda. Wow, sis. Her voice trailed off as she pulled Amanda from the lift. Jeannie sized her up, then said, What gives? You got a date? Sort of. Jeannie's brow furrowed. Don't be coy. It's my duty to know your activities. Since when? Since I promised Mom and Dad that I'd look out for you. Amanda considered Jeannie's argument for about a second, then shook her head. She wasn't buying it. Yeah, okay. Jeannie rolled her eyes. Don't stay out too late, she added with a laugh. Sure thing, Mom. While Amanda made her way to the wishing well, nerves twisted in her gut. She had convinced herself that this blind date was going to turn into the perfect romance, because she'd convinced herself that she was meeting Brad Good. But there was always the chance, a big ol' fat chance, that it wasn't Brad. That idea had been festering long enough to plant the seeds of apprehension inside Amanda. As she came to the entrance of the restaurant, she thought about turning around and heading back upstairs. But then, from just inside the restaurant, Rebecca, one of Sapphire Bay's concierges, saw her and waved. Rebecca looked to be alone, and she looked pretty happy to see her. Amanda hadn't considered that her secret admirer might be a girl. Amanda's apprehension bloomed into full-blown panic. She sucked in a deep breath and gave the girl a weak smile. "Hey, Rebecca," she said. "You working?" Amanda prayed she said yes. Not that there was anything wrong with being gay, she just wasn't. And she'd set her hopes on romance tonight. Rebecca shook her head. "No, I'm here for dinner with my fiancé and his parents." Amanda felt the panic practically drain from her body. "Your fiancé? You'll have to introduce me," she said, more for politeness' sake than anything else. "I definitely will." The girls ended their encounter with pleasantries and went their separate ways as they were each led to different areas of the dining room by two of the restaurant's hostesses. Amanda was escorted to a secluded corner near the southern windows, while Rebecca was taken to a table off-center by the northern windows, where an older couple was waiting. Must be the fiancé's parents, crossed Amanda's mind, and she wondered vaguely where the fiancé was. The waitress came around, and Amanda ordered a glass of wine to sip on while she waited for her mystery date. Maybe it'd help settle her nerves. Rebecca didn't stay at her table long before getting up and heading to the restrooms near the front of the restaurant. Amanda glanced around and checked the time on her phone. He still had about 10 minutes before he was officially late. That's what Amanda got for being anxious. The waitress returned with her glass of wine. Amanda thanked her, then said she'd wait for her friend to arrive before ordering. The waitress left 2 menus and went on her way. Amanda sipped her wine and glanced around the restaurant. Rebecca appeared in the hallway leading to the restrooms and headed eagerly toward the interior of the dining room by way of the entrance. Amanda's gaze followed her. Brad good. Amanda sucked in a breath and held it. Brad was here. And right on time. Was he Amanda's date? She dared to hope. Then her worst nightmare happened. Brad and Rebecca embraced. Amanda closed her eyes. Oh, God. Brad was Rebecca's fiancé. She opened her eyes to see Rebecca draped all over Brad's arm as she led him toward the table where his parents, obviously, were waiting. The older couple smiled and stood to greet him. Amanda had seen enough. She pushed herself up, dragged her purse off the table, and took the long way to the door to avoid passing their table. The last thing Amanda wanted was to be introduced to Rebecca's fiancé, Brad Good. Once outside the restaurant and well into the lobby, she moved faster while coaxing herself not to run to the elevators. She no longer cared who her secret admirer was. She just couldn't sit in that restaurant all evening watching Brad be someone else's fiancé. Chapter 4. The next morning, Amanda slept in. She'd stayed up half the night, watching the bridges of Madison County and crying over a quart of butter pecan ice cream. Thankfully, she didn't have to be at work until the afternoon. She was glad she didn't have to stand at the registration desk this morning and watch Brad stroll into the Beachcomber for his daily breakfast. Then it hit her. She'd bet he'd been meeting Rebecca for breakfast every morning. Just because Amanda hadn't seen them go in or come out together didn't mean they hadn't met up inside. Amanda scolded herself for letting her thoughts run so wild yesterday. She'd set herself up for the heartache, and she had no one else to blame. By the time she was ready to go downstairs for work at 1 o'clock, she'd pretty much chased her blues away. Or so she'd told herself. The lobby was alive with hotel staff and tourists coming and going. Some, those who still had time left on the island, were filled with glee. Others, those whose time was running out, were looking a bit forlorn. Amanda sympathized with the latter group and was thankful that she was the queen of the former, at least for the next year. At the registration desk, she found Marla perched over a box of candy that was on the counter beside a vase of pink, white, and red roses. Another delivery? Surely not. She had, after all, stood up her secret admirer. "Afternoon," Amanda said to her as she made her way behind the counter. "How's the candy today?" she asked, pretending she didn't care who it was from or who it was for. With a piece of candy in one hand, Marla picked up the box and offered it to Amanda. "Today it's Amaday," she said, taking a bite. Amanda peeked at the box. Amaday's milk chocolate was tempting. She plucked a piece from the container, unwrapped it, and bit into it. The delectable treat almost made her forget that it was most likely from Barry. Could Barry really afford all this? Amanda knew that he was only an employee of the flower shop and not the owner. They must pay him really well. She took another bite and turned away. "I'll be in the office," she said. "I'm reviewing schedules today." "Here." Marla shoved the card into Amanda's hand. She took it with her into the office and tossed it on the corner of the desk. She had no desire to see who it was from. She didn't care. 2 vanilla lattes and a decadent piece of cheesecake later, Amanda was feeling a bit sleepy. Times like this, she could appreciate the opportunity to relax under an umbrella on the beach. She rubbed her hands over her face, but it did very little to bring her out of her stupor. She pushed herself up from the desk and went to the windows behind her. She couldn't be out there on the beach, but at least she could take a minute to envy those who were. She noticed Rebecca chatting with a couple of hotel guests out by the pool. Amanda had to wonder why the girl was busting her butt here at Sapphire Bay when she was headed to the altar with Brad Good. The guy had plenty of money, and Amanda wondered how he felt about his fiancée working there. "Hey." Marla's voice filtered into Amanda's thoughts. She turned around to see Marla standing in the doorway, wearing a big old grin that was capable of swallowing the proverbial canary. When Amanda's eyes settled on hers, Marla said, "Someone's here to see you." Who could be here to see me? Then it hit her. Only one person, and she was not in the mood. "Can you just tell him to go away? Tell him I'm not here or something." Marla shook her head. "I can't do that." "Why not?" Amanda huffed. "Because it's not who you think." "Who is it then?" Amanda asked, becoming aggravated with a cat and mouse game Marla was intent on playing. "See for yourself." Marla nodded toward the lobby. Amanda groaned and stopped herself from stomping her foot before heading for the door. She peered out the door and saw Brad Good leaning against the counter. It couldn't be him. A quick scan of the length of the counter showed no one that she supposed might be there to see her. She was about to turn to Marla for direction when Brad glanced up and shot her an uncertain smile. What the? Why is he smiling at me? He had a fiancé who worked at this very hotel. Amanda went to the edge of the counter. Can I help you? Hi. He glanced around and his gaze settled on a couple of empty chairs nearby. He looked back at Amanda. Can we talk over here for a minute? He nodded toward the chairs. Sure. She shrugged. What gives? Amanda made her way around the counter and out into the lobby. She avoided looking at him as they went to the chairs. She didn't understand what this was about. Why did he want to talk to her? She claimed a seat across from him. At first, he didn't look at her. He simply propped his elbows on his thighs and began wringing his hands. After a few seconds, he threw his hands in the air and looked at her. What is it? He asked. Are you married or otherwise engaged? He shrugged. Or are you just not that into me? The last part he said like he thought it was the likely choice. Amanda felt her mouth drop open a little, and she forced it shut. She hesitated, waiting for some sense to come to the situation. None did. I have no idea what you're talking about. You're kidding, right? Amanda shook her head. Afraid not. I'm just wondering why you stood me up last night. Huh? Amanda stayed silent, trying to comprehend what that meant. Her brain was not cooperating. Nothing to say? His tone held a bit of a bite. Are you telling me that you've been sending me the candy and flowers? I thought you knew that. He looked as thunderstruck as she felt. Donnie said you weren't married or involved, or I never would have presumed. Donnie knew? But wait, Brad was engaged. Actually, she said, regaining her emotional strength, I didn't stand you up. You didn't show. I did. She folded her arms over her chest, effectively erecting a barrier. I guess you weren't expecting Rebecca to show up too. Then again, maybe he was. Amanda shuddered. She wanted no part of any weird sex games they might be playing. What? Confusion skewed his face. Look, I know she's your fiancé. What? His voice boomed. I ran into her before you arrived. She told me all about her fiancé. Amanda straightened in her chair, waiting for him to try to talk his way out of it. To her surprise, he started laughing. Jerk. She glared at him through squinted eyes. I don't have a fiancé. He flashed her a smirk. Rebecca is my cousin's fiancé. Huh? Amanda said weakly. Brad nodded. I guess I messed that up royally, she said with a feeble laugh. Talk about starting out on the wrong foot. He shot her a soft smile. How about we try again? When she looked at him for confirmation, he continued. Would you like to have dinner with me this evening? Well, if you'd done that in the first place, we could have avoided all this drama. She leaned back in the chair and crossed her legs. He sucked in a breath and studied her for a moment. She made it a point not to move. Brad pushed out of his chair and hovered over her, resting his hands on the arms of her chair. I'll meet you at the wishing well at 7. His lips were about 2 pencil point lengths from hers. If she responded, they'd touch. Suddenly, Amanda was keenly aware of Brad and how much she wanted to kiss him. His lips skimmed hers as he said, "Don't be late." The moment could have faded away so easily, but he didn't let it. The gentle touch of his lips against hers progressed into a full-blown kiss, one that she reciprocated. He backed away and grinned. "I think we're back on the right track." Still dazed by his power over her, she didn't respond. Brad pulled her to her feet. "Don't stand me up tonight," he said. "I won't," she said softly. Watching him walk away, Amanda blew out a sigh. She hoped and prayed that this would not turn out to be their one and only date. Epilogue. 6 months later. Standing on the edge of Sapphire Bay's party terrace, Amanda listened to Marla and Jeannie's advice, every once in a while sneaking a peek at Brad on the other side of the patio. "So?" Marla asked. "Will you be leaving us now to live the life of leisure as Mrs. Bradgood?" Amanda glanced down at the Sophia Tolley wedding gown she was wearing. Never in a million years had she ever thought she'd be wearing such a beautiful dress on her wedding day. She shook her head and giggled a little. "No, I want to continue working here at Sapphire Bay." She'd talked it over with Brad, and he'd been so sweet about it, saying she could work as little or as much as she wanted. But he hoped it wasn't too much. "Are you serious?" Marla asked, shocked. "Well," Jeannie said with a hint of laughter, "since Amanda's single-handedly responsible for Be Good surfboards being offered exclusively here at Sapphire Bay, Donnie's ready to make her a partner." "Don't I wish?" Amanda said. "I just can't get over you wanting to keep your job," Marla said. "I'd be taking it easy." Amanda knew that was highly unlikely, since Marla had a mountain of money herself. But here she was every day, happy to be a part of the Sapphire Bay machine. Amanda shrugged. "I figure I'll just hang out here with you 2 or 3 days a week, and we can keep an eye on the guests. Make sure everyone's finding romance." Their laughter was overshadowed by Brad's arrival at Amanda's side. "Ladies," he said to Jeannie and Marla, "do you mind if I take my bride for a spin around the dance floor?" He offered his hand to Amanda, and she took it. "We were wondering when you were going to get around to that," Marla teased. As Brad led Amanda away, she could hear Jeannie and Marla's giggles and soft whispers fading away. It was okay, though. Everything was okay when she was in Brad's arms. "So, Mrs. Good." He said it like it pleased him. She hoped so. "Are you happy?" "Ecstatic," she said. "You?" "I'm the luckiest man alive," he said. "So how could I not be happy?" He gave her a wink and drew her deeper into his embrace. "I love you, Amanda. I always will." "I love you too," she whispered against his ear. "Thank you for giving me this wonderful day." Amanda had once heard Marla say that magical things happened at Sapphire Bay because it was a magical place. Coming here for 1 year and ending up as the star of her very own fairy tale, Amanda Wainwright Good believed it. And just like in the fairy tales, she knew she and Brad would live happily ever after. This has been Maybe Baby, a short story, Sapphire Bay Romance Book 3, written by Sandra Edwards, narrated by Heather Masters. Copyright 2015 by Sandra Edwards. Production copyright 2015 by Sandra Edwards.